Good afternoon. Joining me today are Dr. Karen Salmon, the State Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. Jinleen Chan, the Deputy Secretary for Maryland Department of Health. I have always believed that every single child in Maryland deserves a world-class education, regardless of what neighborhood they happen to grow up in. And as governor, advancing that goal is one of my most important priorities and responsibilities. That's why I'm here today to talk about the terrible learning loss that's being caused by the disruption of the pandemic and why it's so critical that we work to get all of our students back into the classroom. Last May, we required all of the local school systems to submit plans for a safe reopening. And in August, all county school systems in Maryland were authorized by the state to reopen for in-person instruction. Many of the school systems in Maryland have been successful in getting at least some of their students back into the classroom, especially those kids with special needs. I want to commend all of the teachers, administrators, parents, and students who have really worked so hard to try to adapt and successfully under very difficult and trying circumstances. Dr. Salmon and the State Board of Education have continued to consult with superintendents, educators, parents, health officials, and medical experts. And a growing consensus has emerged both here in Maryland and across the country that there is no public health reason for county school boards to keep students out of schools. Now, let me say that again. There is no public health reason for school boards to be keeping students out of schools. None. This really isn't controversial. The science is clear. Nearly everyone wants to get our kids back into school. And this is a top priority that has strong and broad bipartisan support. President Biden has made the reopening of schools one of his top priorities for his first 100 days in office. And today he signed an executive order supporting the safe reopening of schools. Dr. Anthony Fauci has said our default position should be to try to keep the children in school or to get them back into school. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, a member of our Maryland Coronavirus Task Force, has said we have to do everything possible to get kids back into classrooms. The American Academy of Pediatrics said earlier this month, children absolutely need to return to in-school learning for their healthy development and well-being. Data from contact tracing and epidemiologists have indicated that school reopenings do not increase community spread or contribute to increased hospitalization rates. And with continued vigilance, better treatments, and the nearly 300,000 of doses of vaccines that have already been administered, our health metrics have already begun to show some indications of plateauing. This month, our positivity rate has dropped nearly 20% to 7.66%. Our case rate has dropped by 26% to 39.5%, and our hospitalizations have declined by 13%. While school systems have made strides with remote learning, far too many students remain unable to thrive in such an environment. And there can be no debating that online learning has taken an unmistakable toll on students, families, and educators. It's now estimated that by the end of the school year, the cumulative learning loss for students could equate to at least 5 to as many as 9 months on average. with the losses disproportionately impacting students of color and low-income and disadvantaged students even more. That is completely unacceptable. It is simply unconscionable. I understand that in earlier stages of the pandemic, that this was a very difficult decision for county school boards to make. But we know so much more now than we did back then. There can no longer be any debate at all. It is abundantly clear that the toll of keeping students out of school far exceeds any potential risk of having students in school where they belong. Every single Maryland student must have at least the opportunity to return to attending school in some form or fashion. Today, we are urgently calling on all county school systems to immediately make every effort to return to hybrid in-person instruction no later than March 1, if not sooner. The State Board of Education has approved safe and effective reopening plans for all 24 school systems, and state health officials are providing additional science-based protocols for safely reopening. While no school system has indicated that they have a need for any additional PPE before opening, we have gone ahead and taken the further step of providing more than 2 million masks and 200,000 face shields, along with hand sanitizer, gowns, gloves, and we have made unlimited coronavirus testing available to every county. Based on the recommendations of America's leading medical experts, Maryland has prioritized COVID-19 vaccinations for teachers and staff. Each school system has plans for vaccinating their staff, and that process is already now underway across the state. These safe and effective vaccines have made returning to normalcy possible, and getting vaccinated is critical to keeping you, your family, and your community healthy and safe. In addition, a total of more than $1.2 billion in federal funds have been made available in the most recent stimulus that just passed a couple of weeks ago, and we've made those funds available to every school system in the state. In order to address the effects of the pandemic and to safely reopen all of our schools. Yesterday, I submitted a budget to the General Assembly that invests a record $7.5 billion into K-12 education, which is $213 million above and beyond the legislative spending formulas proposed by the legislature. Their formulas would have actually significantly cut education funding due to significantly declining enrollment figures. But we are providing additional direct state investment to ensure that not only will every single penny that every single jurisdiction anticipates from the state for education be fully funded at 100%, but in addition to that, every single school system in Maryland will once again see increased investment by the state. On top of that, we're providing an additional $151 million for targeted tutoring grants in every local jurisdiction to support those students who are most at risk of learning loss, as well as a record $833 million in additional school construction funding. As I said the other day, no governor in the history of the state has ever invested more in K-12 education. I know that the vast majority of Maryland teachers desperately want to get back into school with their students and their colleagues. And I want to make it clear to the teachers' union that we fully expect teachers to make every effort to return to the classrooms. The city of Chicago has cut off pay for those teachers refusing to return to the classroom. South Carolina has threatened to take away all of their teaching licenses. Ohio will now only offer vaccinations to teachers in school systems that commit to continuing or beginning in-person learning. We do not want to have to take such actions here in Maryland. But if a school systems do not immediately begin a good faith effort to return to the classrooms, we will explore every legal avenue at our disposal. Our children simply cannot afford any more endless roadblocks or any more moving of the goalposts. The time has come to get all of our kids back into the classrooms and to reopen our schools. Every single day, I hear from parents and grandparents about how much their heart breaks for their kids and grandkids who have fallen so far behind in school and have lost hope of ever catching up, and who have not yet even had a chance to meet their teachers. By law, these decisions to reopen the schools ultimately rest with the duly elected and appointed county school boards, and I cannot order them to open schools. But I want to make it perfectly clear. I will do everything I possibly can do within the law to push to get all of Maryland's children back into the classrooms. And I call on every leader in the state to join me and President Joe Biden in making this an immediate priority. In just a few moments, Dr. Salmon will provide more detail on the reopening of Maryland schools. But first, I want to turn it over to Dr. Chan to discuss the scientific research surrounding schools and COVID-19, as well as public health protocols for getting our students safely back into the classrooms. Dr. Chan.
Thank you, Governor Hogan and Dr. Salmon, and good afternoon. So Dr. Salmon and I, with Governor Hogan back in August, announced that every school system in Maryland was fully authorized to begin safely reopening after they were closed during the early part of the pandemic in the spring. With the school reopening announcement, MSDE and MDH at that time issued guidance to inform local health departments, local school systems, and non-public schools to guide them about decision-making process to safely welcome students back to the classroom. We know, and I too, have received many emails from parents, from educators, about the emotional and the educational toll that being at home and the pandemic isolation has taken on students, and we know that this is something that we need to address immediately. Since August, and since the start of the pandemic, we have learned a great deal about COVID-19 in children, which is why today we are issuing new guidance for school reopening. This guidance is based on some of the information that we have learned from the experience in other states, as well as in other counties, and it's primarily based on several considerations. First, there is little evidence that school reopening is a major driver of overall community spread. In settings that have low community spread, reopening schools has not appeared to increase the levels of transmission in the community. And even with higher levels of community transmission, schools have been able to successfully provide some level of in-person education, even here in our own state. Second, studies have indicated that transmission in schools, so in-person transmission in schools, is relatively uncommon when there is effective implementation of the mitigation strategies, including distancing, use of masks, and cleaning. Maryland has had many schools open across the state, and even with much in-person education, there has actually been very few school outbreaks in those settings. And in fact, with school outbreaks that have occurred that have had higher numbers of students and staff involved, what we have found is that there has been less than ideal implementation of some of the guidance that we have issued. And third, there is some evidence that children, particularly those who are younger, less than 10, are less likely to spread the virus. And last, and this is something that I think we all recognize, including, as the governor mentioned, the American Academy of Pediatrics and our federal partners, Dr. Fauci and others. Research shows that many students, as a result of this prolonged pandemic isolation, including school closures, are falling behind academically, and those will have long-lasting impacts unless we can turn the tide now. There are disparities among individuals who are disadvantaged or who have special educational needs that cannot be met in a fully remote setting. Some studies are also showing growing signs of depression and anxiety with continued pandemic isolation, due in part to prolonged school closures. They also disrupt the delivery of other school-based services that are really important to children and to families across the state, such as school meals, mental health and psychological services, opportunities to support their therapeutic needs, and other healthcare services. So the governor recently announced and discussed again the prioritization of educators and staff within phase 1B of our vaccination plan. And so the educators are eligible for COVID vaccination across the state. So we are working with MSDE to implement those plans, working with county health departments and with county school systems. And I do encourage all education staff to get a vaccine when it becomes available to them. However, and I would emphasize that school reopening decisions should not be based on the availability of vaccination or the level of vaccinations among staff. Again, Maryland has had much success in some settings across the state already in reopening schools despite not having a vaccine up until now. So, based on the research and other considerations, MDH and MSDE have revised Maryland's school reopening guidance with more specific educational options that can be implemented, such as despite and at the current levels of community spread. This guidance includes two options that support the overall goal to quickly and safely return to in-person learning for all students in Maryland. So the first option, option 1, includes daily in-person learning for students who have disabilities, special learning needs, those who have had difficulty learning remotely, or students who are in career or technology paths. For elementary schools, the options include phased daily in-person learning or hybrid learning if health and safety requirements are unable to be met. And then for secondary students, we would recommend that hybrid learning or a phased-in daily in-person learning happen if the health and safety requirements are able to be implemented. This is the option that we would recommend from the Maryland Department of Health. Option 2 includes continued daily in-person learning for students who have unique educational needs, a hybrid or a phased-in learning for elementary school students, and remote learning or a phased-in hybrid learning for secondary students. So importantly, our guidance still emphasizes the need to implement all of the health and medical safety measures that we have already outlined in our guidance. We updated our guidance just last week with new quarantine information. And so distancing, masking, cleaning and disinfection continues to be the cornerstone of making sure that our students and staff are safe in the schools. Also need to limit transmission in the schools using quarantine, contact tracing, identification of cases, and outbreaks and preventing outbreaks, which our team and the local health departments have been working throughout the pandemic to assist and to prevent. And last, our plan includes a provision that allows parents to still have the opportunity to decide for themselves and for their children whether or not a remote option is most appropriate. Again, we've been hearing from parents across the state, and the fears of a decline in their students' achievement this year and the potential impact not only this year but in years to come is palpable. And I have children of my own, and though we try to keep a close eye on them, you know, it is difficult, and I know that there are many families that are struggling. It is important now that we adjust our guidance based on our evolving understanding of the COVID-19 infection, and that we implement that for the good of our children, all of our children. And I do want to thank the educators and all of the staff at the local health departments and pediatricians who've been working tirelessly throughout the pandemic to educate our kids in unprecedented times. But we do believe that it is time to get our kids back into the classroom. So I'd like to bring Dr. Salmon to the podium. Dr. Salmon?
Thank you, Dr. Chan. And thank you, Governor, for your continued support and leadership on behalf of Maryland's 900,000 students. In conjunction with the announcements from the Governor and Dr. Chan today, local school systems shall plan immediately for the return of students for in-person instruction by no later than March the 1st. The recovery plans that were developed by local school systems for hybrid and full in-person instruction were approved by the State Department of Education in August of 2020. These should be implemented to meet the timeline. Parents and families who wish to remain in a virtual learning environment should be afforded the opportunity to do so. The impacts of closed schools on our students have been severe, and we must make every effort to mitigate any further learning loss from this period of disrupted instruction. Research on disrupted instruction shows that the cumulative learning loss, as the Governor said, by the end of this year could equate 5 to 9 months on the average, with the losses significantly greater for students of color and students in low-income situations. In-person learning provides significant benefits for our children. In addition to educational instruction, schools support the development of social-emotional skills throughout interactions with teachers and peers. They establish a safe environment for learning and often address nutritional, behavioral health, and other special needs, as well as facilitate physical activity. The absence of in-person learning may be particularly harmful for children living in poverty, children of color, English language learners, children with diagnosed disabilities, and young children, and likely has already contributed to the widening inequities in our society. It is our obligation as state leaders to intervene on behalf of these students to ensure they are afforded the opportunities to succeed and grow. This morning, the Governor and I shared a letter with the Maryland State Education Association and others imploring the leadership of the unions to work alongside of us to safely return students and staff to school buildings. After reviewing all of the research available regarding the impact of the pandemic on the operational status of school buildings, there is not a demonstrated public health reason to keep schools closed. We know that contact tracing from the majority of cases affecting staff or students within schools when they were open for hybrid instruction originated outside of school facilities. Additionally, we have seen child care facilities and the school systems that have chosen to reopen do so safely and without significant impact on community spread. All schools that reopen shall continue to utilize the appropriate health and safety measures to mitigate the transmission of the virus, such as the consistent and correct use of masks, social distancing to the extent possible, hand hygiene, cleaning and disinfection, and contact tracing in collaboration with local health departments. I know Dr. Chan mentioned this, and I'm mentioning it again because it is extremely important. In an effort to bolster a safe learning environment for all educators, school staff, and and students, all local school systems are coordinating with local health departments and local hospitals to identify available vaccines for administration to their staff. Several systems have already begun vaccinating school staff at this time, and more will commence vaccinations in the coming days. While receiving vaccinations are not a requisite precursor restricting a return to in-person instruction, they can further ensure a safe and comfortable learning environment for those that are wary of the prospect of returning to school buildings. I will continue to work with this team at the Maryland Department of Health and with local school systems to make certain that this process continues with haste and efficiency. There are more than $780 million in additional funds that will be allocated to all of our local school systems as a second iteration of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which will assist local school systems for a wide range of allowable uses, including remediation of learning loss, implementation of summer learning programs, and purchasing education technology. Additional funding for evidence-based strategies such as extending and implementing high-intensity tutoring services to more students, establishing additional and extended summer learning programs, addressing social-emotional learning, and providing targeted academic acceleration to further mitigate the impacts from this disruption of instruction are vital strategies in our efforts to combat the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic on our students. I strongly encourage our local school systems to consider many of these as they develop plans for the utilization of these funds, particularly targeted tutoring and extending the length of the school year for summer learning. We will continue to offer assistance and guidance to school systems as they bring students back in various learning formats in an expeditious manner in the coming days and weeks, and look forward to having our children afforded this opportunity to learn in person in a safe and conducive environment once again. To the parents and the families that have written countless letters to me in recent months, I want you to know that I have read each and every one, and the difficulty and stress that so many of you have faced since the start of this pandemic has been heard loud and clear. It is these experiences that shape so much of how I have thought about our mission in schools, and I have a deep sense of gratitude for our parents as they have stood beside their children and teachers as all parties have weathered the difficulties of virtual learning. I also want to take a moment before I conclude my remarks today to thank all of our state workers, educators, and school staff who have continued to fulfill the critical responsibilities of their jobs despite the challenges of the pandemic. And I also want to thank our child care providers for their steadfast support for the children of Maryland as they have been providing safe refuge for the youngest children since the earliest days of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salmon, Dr. Chan. With that, I'll be happy to take a few questions. I didn't say that. I said if they're not going to take good faith efforts, then we'll have to see what we can do to encourage them. But I didn't say anybody hadn't taken any. We just announced it just now, so they haven't had a chance. Well, look, a majority of our school systems have already gotten at least some of their kids back in the classrooms. They started that in August. Almost all of our private schools have been open since August. But there are a couple of counties that just said we're going to stay closed, and they have not implemented the plans that have already been approved by the state. So we're going to try to encourage them to do so.
Do you see this as enough time in certain jurisdictions to get everything open?
Well, a number of them are pushing to do that. I know that Dr. Santelises in Baltimore City, who has done a good job of getting some kids back into schools, wants to bring more kids. I think there are a lot of teachers that want to get back in the classrooms, and I think there's been a lot of effort in some of the school systems and some of the hardworking staff and teachers and administrators to try to work on these problems, but now we have the approval of the state. They've got approved vaccine plans. They've got approved reopening plans. And now we have, it's not just us saying so. I mean, many states have been open for 5 months. Many of our schools have been open for 5 months. The President of the United States says it's one of his most urgent priorities, and we're of different parties. You know, I talked about Chicago. I mean, it's other states are pushing. I'm not the only one that's saying it's time. Almost every medical expert and education expert agrees. Well, we're just trying to get things moving a little faster along. I mean, this is a plan that just was announced last night by the incoming president, who just got sworn in yesterday. We think it helps bolster our success with the teachers union. We have support of, for example, I had a great discussion with President Ferguson, who's the chairman, the president of our state senate, who's a former educator, former teachers union member, who strongly believes we should get kids back in school as quickly as possible. This is a bipartisan effort, and I think the time is now. We've got declining metrics. We've got 5 months of data, not only all across Maryland, but all across the country. And it's frustrating that we have, a lot of school systems have made incredible efforts. Some of them are just still saying, we're not coming back. It's just not acceptable.
With regard to vaccination, clearly we're going to have a vaccination demonstration here with some educators. I'm getting messages sent to me by educators, some of the teachers. When will enough teachers be vaccinated? How many teachers have been vaccinated? Will it be possible to, for instance, for Georgia County, who we're subtly talking about here, to get their people done so that they can get vaccinated? And is it fair to say, I'm not going back to the vaccination?
Well, as I said, many schools in Maryland and a majority of schools in other states have been open for 5 months with no vaccines. Dr. Chan said it's not a requirement to get, and I think Dr. Salmon and Dr. Chan both said, you don't have to get a vaccine before you can get back in the classroom. Hundreds of thousands of teachers are back in the classroom. And we have great data and metrics to say it has been safe. But we just moved this into phase 1B on Monday of this week. So they're just starting to ramp up. But they have, $7.5 billion. They got an extra billion, 1.2 billion just open schools. They have huge infrastructures and 100-some thousand people. They've got school nurses, the county health departments. This should be a priority for teachers that want to get a vaccine. They should be able to get one. Yeah. Right. Well, it's one of the reasons why I announced that. When I broadened the categories, I said, look, we only have 500,000 vaccines. There's 1.5 million people in phase, in phase 1. They have to get 2 doses, so we really need 3 million. But they weren't doing them fast enough in phase 1A, so we broadened it so more people could get their vaccines faster. But there aren't enough appointments for everybody, and that's why President Biden is launching a brand new plan. I think it came out at midnight last night with 24 steps. We're going to be announcing further steps next week. We're going to be utilizing, I think, FEMA and the National Guard and whatever we can to help all the providers do a better job on getting the needles into arms. But that's why we want to expand it to more people so they can get it done. And that's why school systems are great. They have the infrastructure to do it, to help. So it's not just backed up at those few people that have been doing the vaccines who aren't quite, they're having trouble digging out. No, we're definitely going to move into 1C because we want to get more vaccines and more arms. So if people are, we have, I think, 400,000. Some of them, we just started second doses, so it's a little bit confusing. After the first 3 weeks, we have to go revaccinate everybody again, or 4 weeks if it's Pfizer or Moderna. So many of the ones we're doing now are second times. That takes a lot of time and effort. But we did 15,000 in the last 24 hours. We only get 10,000 a day. But Biden has promised to ramp up the deliveries to the states, and we're trying to build the infrastructure so that they can get more needles in. But by allowing more people in more locations with more help, like school systems, to put needles in people's arms for their own people, that will help us get through the supply and take a burden off of those overloaded local health department systems. I've talked with Joe Biden, and I talked with the head of his new coronavirus task force, and look, we're in sync with a lot of what they want to do. They're going to make further announcements in the next few days. We're going to make further announcements next week, and we're doing everything we possibly can to help all of those providers, the hospitals, the federal contract on the nursing homes, those local health departments. We're bringing in the Guard. We're providing more funding. We're saying, what else? We're providing people, volunteers. We're hiring contractors for them. The federal government is now going to come and help all of them as well. So we're happy to have additional help. I mean, if you read the Washington Post or the New York Times or any of the major stories today are all about the federal system and what they're going to do to fix it. We think it's great, but in the meantime, we're going to do everything we can at the state level to help our local providers. Yeah. I'm fairly certain it's not going to cost us anything. It was a political decision, I think. We were requested by the Secretary of the Army and the Mayor of D.C. To come into the federal city to protect our nation's capital. We did so. So did many other states. Was very proud that one of our generals, General Brickhead, was commanding 14,000 troops from 20 states. The federal government will pay for that. And we're going to appeal that to the Biden administration, who I think probably was, they're agreeing to, I think, Title 32, 100% funding for Guard troops that are called up for even perhaps for our coronavirus recovery, which will help us send even more of them out into the state of Maryland. But the federal government can't request our help and then say, good luck, you have to pay for it. I have no idea. The mission is still continuing. When they leave, how many, when they start transitioning out, what the costs are, I don't know. I think in 1 week in Baltimore, we spent $20 million, but that was 4,000 troops.
Last question. What types of vaccines? I've heard a lot of people were involved in the distribution process of Baltimore City, for example, has about 6,000 doses sitting there. They don't have staff to get them out. But they think they'll need to expand and Hogan. What is the state doing, or what can the state do to help places like that when they have to supply?
Well, that's our biggest problem right now is the people who we've given this a lot. We've delivered 99.6% of all of our vaccines to all the providers who are responsible for doing them. Baltimore City was supposed to do their own healthcare workers, their own first responders, as were the other county health departments. Some of them are doing great. Some have done 90% of them. Some are struggling. We have 279 members of the National Guard that we've sent into counties all across the state to help. We provided them, I think, 700 some other people. We're hiring contracts, but it really is their responsibility, but we're doing everything we can to help them. Our biggest concern right now is, it's not that we're not getting the vaccines out or not that we're not getting enough supply. It's that those people we're getting it to are falling short, and that's why we're trying to help them pick up the pace.
Is there a concern by your administration that some people are not getting the vaccine because they simply don't want it? Healthcare workers, teachers, there's a lot of people who say, I don't want the shot.
It's one of the reasons why we are at the numbers we are, and we're hearing from the hospitals. We have way more than we thought we needed. The federal providers that are doing the nursing homes, they say we have more than we need. The local health departments are saying, Prince George's County, for example, hey, we can't get people to take it. So we're broadening. There are a whole lot of people out there that want to get it. We're only going to get the virus under control if we get them stuck in arms. So we're going to try to, if these guys don't want it, we're going to these guys. And then we're going to go to those guys. We're going to use all the vaccines we get. We want to go about it in an orderly fashion because we don't just want, 6 million people rushing for 500,000 vaccines, but we are going to continue to open it up to keep the pace going. Right now, those providers are a little bit slow, but as I've said repeatedly, at some point that's going to change. We're going to ramp up. We're going to have mass vaccination sites. They're all going to really get their act together, and then we're already producing at 50% higher than our supply on a daily basis. Pretty soon we're going to be at 100% or 200%, and we're going to run out. So that's why we're pushing the federal government to give us more.
That's it, guys.
Thank you. The important part is going to happen now.
Thank you so much, Governor. Again, good afternoon, and I'd like to introduce a special group of folks over here to my left who represent just about every profession in the education world across the state and represent different parts of our state, from the far west to the very low eastern shore to the central part of the state. And they are all going to be getting the vaccine with me today. So it's a very special day, and we're very proud of them. And so I'm going to just introduce them, and if they'll just stand when I introduce them. Annie Newborn, who is a teacher at Easton Middle School. Cindy Reyes, who is a ESOL tutor at Easton Elementary School. Boyd Michael, Dr. Boyd Michael, who is the superintendent of Washington County Public Schools. Will Woodson, who is a bus driver from Washington County Public Schools. Carolyn Chu, who is a food service worker at the Mary Moss J. Adams Academy. Brenda Gerardo, who is a custodian at at Arnold Elementary. Ron Green, who is principal at Wicomico County High School, and Danielle Cottingham, who is a counselor at Wicomico High School. Horace Martin, who is Operations Area Manager in Annapolis South Country area for the Anne Arundel County School System, and Aaron Anderson, who is in the central office as a PR director in Washington County. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the esteemed doctor and his staff, and I will sit and be ready to be back.
I'm just going to go say hi while Dr. talks.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Colonel Eric Ellerly. I'm the Maryland State Surgeon for the Maryland National Guard. And joining me today to help support in the effort, I have both Air and Army National Guard members here. The group that you see behind you are good to go. They've gone and come back. These are top flight medical people, and that's what these educators need. I just want to take a half a second to remark on the fact that the individuals are stepping up to do this. This is so important to get our clearly get our kids back in the schools. But I just want to give kudos to each of the individuals who are here today to represent the schools and take this. I hope that this goes out as a loud signal to all those others that are concerned about getting the vaccine and its safety, that this is a safe vaccine, and it is the path to taking these masks off and throwing them away. So I look forward to doing all that. And right now, if I can have, we're going to go, unless there's a particular order, ma'am, Dr. Salmon?
I'm right here.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the other side. There you are. Don't want to lose you. If we can start with you. So if we can bring up a first vaccine for that, and we'll work through this. We're going to do it rather rapidly. I have all of the doses drawn, and I have a number of vaccinators here. I don't want to make this a synchronized swimming event where they all get it simultaneously, because we need to keep an eye on everybody. But at the same time, so I want to stage it out so we can get some photographs for the individuals. So with that, we'll begin.
Like I was telling everybody else, I've already got it. They have a little bit later
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you guys very much. Good luck and
Most of them downloaded right now.
We're going to do the reader here. All right, this doesn't do anything there. It's in there. Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. All right, we're in the two Subarus. I'm doing a Zoom.